In the previous video, tutorial 2, I explained how to create tables in SQL and also how to insert data into it using the Zagi database, which has been used in your textbook. Now in this video, I'm going to use a few examples just to further practice SQL and also explaining when given a question how we are going to answer and how we are going to write the queries. So we learn, for example, how to use select statement, where, group by, order by, or for example, when we need to use join in order to answer a query. So basically, there are just a few examples to further practice the data retrieval using the SQL queries. So just to review what I explained in the previous video, the ZagiDB example, as you can see here in this slide, has a few tables, such as, for example, region, store, product, vendor, category, customer, and so on. Now, when we are when we want to create tables, as I also explained in my last video, the order of creating tables matters. So you have to start with creating tables that, for example, don't have foreign keys. If a table has a foreign key, it means that it is dependent or it is referencing to another table. So you first have to create that table. For example, here in the tables that you see here, can we create, for example, the product table first? So the answer is no, because the product table has two columns, vendor ID and category ID. These two columns are foreign key here because they are referencing other tables. For example, vendor ID is referencing to vendor ID in the vendor table, and category ID is referencing the category table. Therefore, we first have to create these two tables. Now, can I create vendor and category first? Yes, because they are not depending on any other table. And this is the same for other tables. For example, if you're going to create the, for example, the sales transaction table, you first have to check whether there is any foreign key or dependency to other tables. For example, here you can see we have transaction ID, customer ID, store ID, and transaction date. So here again we have two foreign key columns, and so one is customer ID, because customer ID is primary key in the customer table, therefore it is foreign key here, and so it is referencing to the customer table. So we cannot create sales transaction with some customer IDs when we have not even defined those customers or created a customer table. The same is for the store. So we cannot have some store IDs in the sale transaction when we don't have any store. So we have to first define customer and the store. So this is the way how to understand which table to create first. Therefore, if you are going to create a table, for example, product first or sale transaction first, you will get the error. The same is for inserting data into tables. So I've explained all this in the previous video, so I recommend you to watch the tutorial 2 if you have not done already. And now let's go to the examples. The question asks us to find the product name and product price. So let's go back to our database. And so as you can see here, the product name and product price are stored in the product table. And so we are selecting some columns from the product table. Therefore, if I'm going to write this query, so I'm going to connect, going to the SQL server here, and I'm going to use my own database, but please remember that you have to, either for the practice or for your assignment or team project, you have to use the databases that are assigned to you. So for example, my database is this one, but for example, if you are assigned to project DB2, then you have to right click here, click on new query, and then write your queries here. You are not allowed to write your queries on the master database or any database that you want. And this is the same also for your group DBs, which I explained in another video. So these are the group DBs here are actually created for your team project. Now back to our example. The question asked me to select list product name and product price supplied by vendor Mountain King. So I'm going to write select product name and product price. And as I mentioned before, SQL is not case sensitive, therefore you can write like product name and or like even like the select the SQL statement itself and also the column names, none of them are not case sensitive, so you can also write like this. So this is the same. Select product name and product price, which we have here, product name and product price from. Now we have to identify which table we are selecting these columns from. The table is the product because these columns are in the product table, so from the product table. And we want that another condition here is that it should be supplied by vendor Mountain King. So where is the vendors? So now in the product table we only have vendor ID, so we don't have vendor names, right? In order to find the vendor name, we need to access the table vendor. So now we are accessing, in order to answer this query, we need to access two tables. One was the product table to get the product name and price. The second table is the vendor table to get the vendor name, right? So I'm selecting from product and vendor. So I'm joining these two tables. So one way to join tables is using the where clause. And so you write, for example, select some columns from the tables that you want. So table 1, comma, table 2, where now you have to join these two tables based on the common attribute they have. Now I'm going to join these two tables based on their vendor ID, right? Because vendor ID is the common attribute between the table products table and vendor table. Their product vendor ID is equal to vendor ID. Now in my result, I would like to also see the vendor name. So I'm adding the vendor name, for example, in the select. So whatever you write in the select part of your statement that is here, these are the columns that will be shown in your result. So whatever you want to see in the resulting table, you have to write them here. And then in the from part, you identify which tables you are selecting those columns from. In this case, we were selecting from two tables. Because it is more than one table, we have to join those tables. And we already did it using their common attribute, which is vendor ID. And then you can always order your result based on any column that you want. For example, here I may want to, for example, order by product price, for example, if I want to sort them by price. Now back to the question. So list product name and price supplied by vendor Mountain King. So the condition here, one condition is that the vendor should be Mountain King. So here I add my condition and vendor name equal to Mountain King. So let's check the name, Mountain King. Now here I would like to explain just one point. As I mentioned, SQL is not case sensitive, so you can write, for example, select from where, so any part of your SQL statement, either the statement itself or the column names, they can be written like uppercase or lowercase, and it doesn't matter. The only place that it is case sensitive is when you're using the strings. For example, when I'm saying that, for example, and vendor name is equal to Mountain King, I cannot write it here because in the table, Mountain King is only the first letters are capital and the rest are lowercase. So I have to write it exactly as it is. So I'm writing it Mountain King. So this is how you have to write it. And then we also want to order the result by product price. Now we should be good now. Let's execute this query here. Okay, so there was just one small mistake here. So I typed R2 twice. So now we should be good. Product price. Now I click execute, and now we have the vendor name, Mountain King, and we have the product's name and price for all the vendors that have that their name is Mountain King. So this was to answer question 1. Now let's go to the next one. And okay, here I also want to mention that there are 2 ways to join tables. The first form is how I wrote it here. Another way to write the same query is using the join. So either you join 2 tables using where, or you use the term join. So for example, I can say select vendor name, product name, product price from product and vendor. Now instead of using comma here, you write from product join vendor, right? And then you have to specify on which columns you want to join them. So I write from product join vendor on. Now I want to, for example, join them based on their common attributes, right? So this is the same as what we wrote here. So we join those 2 tables based on their common attribute, which was vendor ID. So I write on product.vendor ID equal to vendor.vendor ID. And the rest should be the same. So we also want the vendor name be Mountain King, and we also want to sort the result by product price. So as you can see, I'm using either uppercase or lowercase. It doesn't matter because it's not case sensitive. The only place it's case sensitive is here, inside this when you're referring to the string. So now let's execute this. So you can see I get exactly the same result. So this is just another way of joining 2 tables. You can use either of these forms, either using where, in which case you're writing selecting, you select the columns you want from table 1, comma table 2, where then you have your join condition, or you're using the join on. So you select the columns again from table 1, instead of comma, now you write join table 2, and instead of where, you have on. Then you have the join condition. Now let's go to the next example. List the product name and the number of units sold in store 3. So I'm going to also show you one thing here. In order to comment comment any line that you want here. You can use, for example, 2 dash. So we are writing our queries, for example, select from. So what should we select? So far we know we need the product name and also the number of items. Sold in a store S3. Now, from product name can be obtained from table product, from product, and also where is the number of items? Number of items is in the sold via table and sold via table. So what we actually want to see, the result that we want is actually a table with the products and the and how much we or how many items of that product we have sold. So the total sale for each product, right? So now let's see where we can find this information. So as you can see in the tables here, the table that have that information is the sale transaction table. In the sale transaction, we can see all the transactions with the transaction ID and also the store ID. And also, in order to understand which products were sold in each transaction, we need to access another table, which is the sold via table. So in the sold via table, we can see in each transaction which products were sold and also how many of that product. For example, transaction 333 here have, for example, products 3x3 and also 1x1, and you can see how much of each product has been sold in this transaction. Now, having this information, we know which tables we have to select from. The only reason we are also including the product table here is because the question asked to find the product name. So if it was product ID, we could only use the table sales transaction and sold via. Having these two tables, we can find out how many how much item we sold for each product in each store. The reason we need the sales transaction is actually the store ID here. Now, I'm going to access these three tables. Another point which I want to explain is that we want, if I just keep it number of items here, first I show you what happens. Now, because the correct answer is using the sum, because we want the total number of items sold for each product, but let's write it here, this way now. Now we have to join these three tables, so I'm using where to join these three tables, and now we have to find how we can join these tables. For example, the table product and sold via can be joined by their common attribute, which is product ID. So I write product ID is equal to sold via dot product ID, and the other tables that we have to join are sales transaction and sold via. So sales transactions and sold via can be joined through the TID or transaction ID. The TID is equal to sold via dot TID. And we also have another condition, and that condition is that we want the items sold in a store S3, and that information is here. So we want also and sales transaction dot store ID being equal to S3. So you can see in S3 we have three transactions, T333, T444, T555, and then joining this table with sold via, we can see which products were sold in each transaction. Transaction T333, for example, we can see the products sold in this transaction, the same for the other ones. So here I put this condition as well. And because we want this information for each product, we have to group by product. Now, if I don't do it, if I just write it this way, let's see what happens. If I execute this, we can see the product names and number of items, but this result doesn't give me how much we sold for each product in total. For example, you can see that the Dura Boot item here, the product here, is repeated twice of it. We want, for example, one Dura Boot and the number of items being 1 plus 4, which is 5. Therefore, I'm going to add using the aggregate function sum here so that it actually adding these items for me. And because I'm using the aggregate function, I also have to group by because I need them for each product. So I'm grouping actually based on the products, right? So I group by the product ID. The reason I'm writing product.product ID, not product ID, you cannot write it this way. It's because the 3 tables we are accessing here, you can see this table, we have product ID in 2 of these tables. So we have to identify which product ID in which table we are accessing. So I want to group them by product.product ID and let's say product name. And so now we are ready to run our queries. So now I get the result that I want. So as you can see, the Dura Boot is only, you can see the total or the final state. Now, one other point I would like to mention here, which is not really important, but just to let you know, you can see the name of the column here is no column name. This is the sum of number of items. And this is where you can actually use alias or AS. So you can write AS and rename, selecting a name for this column, choosing a name. For example, I'm going to write total sold as the name for this column. Now if I execute this, sorry, I have a, so now it's the total sold. And so that's it. There are the examples I wanted to, these 2 examples that I wanted to cover. Based on these 2 examples, you learned how to, for example, write the queries, what to include in your select part of the statement, what to include in the from part, and also how to join tables, either using where or join, and where to write, for example, your conditions. And also you learned how to use the group by. And so thanks for listening to me, and good luck.